great to be here. And I don't know, someone was mentioning, another professor was mentioning that maybe people are a little tired of politics at this point after having the hordes of politicians and media troop through here for Super Tuesday. But hopefully I can say something fresh. How many of you are registered Ohio voters? I'm just curious. Oh, wow, a lot. Oh, yeah. I was saying I was at Ohio Wesleyan last night, and nobody was an Ohio voter. Nobody voted. So did you guys, but I don't know if you guys are Republicans. Did anybody vote yesterday? Okay. So, oh, wow, a lot of people voted yesterday. Oh, well, good. All right. Well, that's terrific. So anyway, because I'm going to begin with a message about I'm going to begin and end with a message about involvement and about participation. Which is, I think, the only way the system will change. And from my perspective, the system does need change. And someone asked me a question last night, a student asked me a question last night about your generation. And I think your generation has to be sort of really at the vanguard of the change. Because I think the adults have really messed it up. And so I think we need your help in changing the system. So I'll begin with sort of the bottom line message that most of the people who interview me begin with, and that is that, let me ask this question as well. I usually ask this question. How many of you who are registered voters are independent voters, are registered independent? So not so many in this crowd, but the national average is 40%. 40% of all voters, registered voters, are independents or unaffiliated or whatever. Different states call it different things. So that is more than either Republicans that's more than Republicans or Democrats, which means that a plurality, 40% of all voters would rather be unaffiliated than be Republicans or Democrats. And to me, that reflects something about the system. That reflects a problem with the system, that they've chosen to disaffiliate. They are unhappy. They are the largest voting bloc in the nation, and they've determined the outcome of every election since World War II. And they will certainly determine the outcome. 30% of the voters who voted yesterday here in Ohio were independent voters. They're allowed to participate in primaries here. And I'll talk about that because they're not allowed to participate in primaries in a lot of other states. And they're tired, these independent voters are tired of being ignored and unrepresented and not having a say in how politics and government is run. So I begin the book, all of you are, I'm guessing a lot of you are political science and history majors, and I begin the book with Thomas Paine, who, as you know, wrote Common Sense, which lit the fuse of the revolution. And in that book, he called for a democratic republic to be governed by the people, which was a revolutionary idea. And there had never been one before. And it was a message for the people. He wasn't writing for the elites. And I sort of hope that that's what I'm doing with my book, too, is that I'm trying to light a fuse. And I did the Ohio State University NPR show earlier today, and a lot of people that called in were saying, I'm an independent, I'm frustrated, and I was encouraging them to get involved. So that was sort of the purpose of the book. That propelled me into the idea for writing the book. And the way I sort of did it, the way I reached out to independent voters is I got voter lists. And Sally helped me, I just cold called people that were registered as unaffiliated voters here in Ohio and elsewhere around the country. And I said, do you want to talk to me? I'm a journalist from Washington. Do you want to talk to me about politics? And amazingly enough, most of them wanted to. They were so happy that someone cared, that someone wanted to hear what they had to say about politics. And that's because the parties don't listen to the independent voters. So I got voter lists. I reached out to citizen groups. One of your other professors is has been involved in No Labels, and that's a group that I reached out to, and I got to talk to some people that way, activists. I did focus groups. I did one here in Columbus, which was not that successful. It was a pretty small group. I did one up in Akron, and I just did a lot of different things. These voters, they're just extremely frustrated. In half the states in the nation, they are not allowed to participate in the primaries. And I had a number of calls today from people who said, either I'm an independent and I don't want to register as a Republican or Democrat, but I want to be able to vote in the primaries, or they said, I registered or I signed as a Republican yesterday just so I could vote, but there were local judges races that they wanted to vote in, and they said, well, I wanted to vote for some in the Republican column and some in the Democratic column, and I couldn't do that. And I am a total advocate of open primaries. I think the candidates would be very different if all voters could participate in primaries and vote across the board in Republican and Democrat. If we had California is experimenting with this, where all the candidates are listed on one ballot and everyone can vote, every registered voter can vote. And I'm a big advocate of this. I think the candidates that were selected to participate, that would be selected to participate in the general election, would be very different, extremely different. So I am sort of asserting that our system is not totally democratic because these independent voters can't participate. And it's a system that they pay for with their tax dollars. Primaries are paid for with tax dollars. I think Ron Paul is a bit of what's the word I'm looking for? Ron Paul is a bit of a symptom, I think. His candidacy is a bit of a symptom of what's wrong with the system. I think people are voting for him, and he didn't do very well yesterday. He didn't have a good day. He was the only candidate that went to Alaska, and he didn't win in Alaska. And his number of delegates is very small that he's amassed so far. But the people who are voting for him, I think, are expressing, a lot of them it's a protest vote. And I know that, some young people like Ron Paul. I interviewed him. I interviewed some young people who had voted for him in 2008. And I know that sometimes the media or sort of conventional wisdom is that, young people vote for him because he's a libertarian and he wants to legalize drugs, which is not it at all. A lot of young people of all ages, said to me, he's a truth teller. He tells it like it is. He doesn't give us the pablum and the sound bites that a lot of other politicians give us. Now, some people, I said this morning, some people might think he's a little kooky. Some people might think he has some sort of far out views, but they don't know where to go. They want to do something else. They want to say we're frustrated with the Republicans and Democrats, and they don't know how to express that. Now, we have an effort that's going on this fall. Has anybody heard of Americans Elect? Does anybody know? You have? It's a totally sort of online effort, although they have student groups all over the country. I spoke to they have a Sunday night call with the student groups all over the country, and I did that a week ago. And they are they had $20 million, so they had very significant resources. They had a couple of rich guys that funded the effort. And they are getting on the ballot. I would venture to say they will probably be on the ballot in most of the states, if not all 50 states, with that $20 million to pay people to collect signatures to get on the ballot for a slate that says Americans Elect, sort of candidate to be named later. And they're going to have a nominating process online, and any registered voter will be able to participate in this nominating process. It remains to be seen who they will nominate or what kind of candidate it will be. It's completely unclear to me, to tell you the truth, exactly. Their motive, I think, is just to offer some kind of alternative, some kind of a protest. I don't know who their candidate will be or how well they will do. But Ross Perot in 1992 got 19% of the vote. And I don't know how many of you 1992. Well, you were all born in 1990. But you were little. He was a little kooky too. And he dropped out of the race and got back in. But his message was the deficit. He was almost exclusively talking about the debt and the deficit and the loss of American jobs to overseas corporations back then. And he got 19% of the vote. So that 20% is kind of sloshing around of independent voters that I think is up for grabs for sure. So that remains to be seen. The partisan warfare, the self-interest, money in politics, special interest influence, these are the kind of things that independent voters are very frustrated about. And they just have, to a certain extent, it seems that they've lost a bit of faith in the system. And they don't think change is possible. And I guess what I'm trying to do is tell them change is possible. So in the swing vote, as Paul mentioned, I focus on 4 key swing states: Colorado, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Ohio. And I spent, a significant amount of time in all 4 in 2010 doing the reporting. And because I wanted to hear the voices of the voters. And in the book, I quote voters a lot. You hear their voices. And I think it's a little, normally, I have to say as a national political writer, and my editors kept pushing me to put more of my voice in, and I kept saying, I want to hear the voters. It's what's sort of celebrated, what's sort of rewarded as a national political reporter is punditry, and is sort of their reporter's own opinions. And it's sort of a struggle to, I did an event, I'm not making this up, with the deputy bureau chief of the New York Times a couple of weeks ago in Washington. And he said to me, you have too much respect for the voters. He said, I don't care about voters. He was not really kidding when he said that. The media, as Sarah Palin would say, the lamestream media. I don't want to quote Sarah Palin, but the national media elite is vested in the system the same way that the Republican and Democratic parties are vested in the system. So they celebrate and follow the candidates and the political parties. And who do you see on television? You see the left and right activist politicians. You don't see those in the center. You see the ones that are making noise and being provocative. You see this morning on Morning Joe, who did you see? You see people who have run campaigns and things like that. So you don't see the center on television. And it's tough to break through. It's tough to sort of get the attention of the media and tell them that the center really matters. And that sort of polarity in the media, the blogosphere, I hate to even mention the name Rush Limbaugh, but the national radio, the left and right, Tea Party and MoveOn.org, everyone's got a blog, and if any politician dares to step out of line and not sort of hew to the left and the right, they attack them, and it's very tough not to follow your party leaders, not to go with the money, not to make your supporters happy, and the people that are, money now in politics. I interviewed Dan Glickman, who is a former congressman from Kansas and a Secretary of Agriculture and has had a number of jobs in Washington. And he said to me, money is not just the mother's milk of politics, it's the yogurt and cottage cheese. You can trace the rise of government, the rise of the size of government, tax benefits, tax breaks for corporations and programs and write-offs and all kinds of things, to the explosion of the lobbying industry in Washington. And independent voters know this, and they're very frustrated that the average person, that money rules, and that the average person can't have much of a say. Now, I think the SB 5 vote is definitely an example where citizens did have a say, where citizens collected the signatures. Now, of course, I guess the Republicans would say it was unions, that was behind it. But who are unions? Unions are people. And so, they collected the signatures, they got on the ballot, they won overwhelmingly, and the politicians listened to them and they backed off. So that is certainly an example of how citizens can make a difference. So we have these 4 states, and I also have 4 types of voters that I talk about. I talk about NPR Republicans. These would be Republicans that would not be embarrassed to say that they listen to NPR. These would be what we used to call Rockefeller Republicans, for Nelson Rockefeller, who also certainly long precedes you guys. But he was a governor of New York State, a moderate, socially moderate. Now I think we would call him a liberal Republican. And they are in New England. There are a lot of NPR Republicans. Obviously, Mitt Romney is a candidate. Kind of design. He is their guy. I mean he would appeal to them. But they are all over. I'm sure in the suburbs of Ohio, in the affluent suburbs of Ohio, there are NPR Republicans. They tend to be older, higher income, socially liberal or socially moderate. They're not interested in debates over abortion and gay rights, and they would be turned off by this contraception stuff. They are fiscally conservative. They care about sort of good government and are fiscally conservative, and some of them voted for Barack Obama in 2008 because they were turned off by the big spending of the Republican Congress for a decade and some of George Bush's sort of inadequacies. And so some of them voted for Barack Obama, but then they were turned off by the big government approach of the Democrats and healthcare reform, and so now they're very much up for grabs. So if Romney is the nominee, I would suspect that he would do very well with this group. I would suspect that someone like Rick Santorum, not so much, which is something that I think the Republican Party leaders know, which is why I think Republican Party leaders, the Gingrich and Santorum and, have all talked about sort of the backroom pressures on behalf of Romney and how he has all the sort of party elite lined up behind him. Because I think they do think he's a candidate that can appeal to the swing voters. Now, the way he's had to twist himself in the primaries, there's a lot of an appeal to the right conservatives in the primaries. I think there's a lot of stuff he's going to have to back off on in the general and move to the center. So that's the first group. For you all is the Facebook generation, and those are voters under 35. Voters under 35 are registered as independents in a higher percentage than any other age group. They don't really like the two-party structure. They wish they had more choices. They feel that there are a lot of flaws in the political system. They don't really trust a lot of what goes on in the political system. Now, they do tend, though, to be very, obviously there are conservative young people who are, affiliated with the Republican Party. But a majority tend to be very socially liberal. Again, like the NPR Republicans, they have gone far beyond. They think issues of gay rights and abortion, they've gone way beyond that, and they don't think it sort of is appropriate. They think it's a personal choice, and it's silly to be talking about it. But they also have student loans. They have, they've had trouble getting jobs in the past couple of years, and so they're a bit unsettled. They obviously went for Barack Obama in a big way in 2008. They liked his newness, they liked his freshness, they liked his message that was totally different. I think the question, it was interesting that I interviewed a lot of these younger voters, and they told me, well, we would vote for a Republican if there was a socially moderate Republican, because we like some things that the Republicans say about debt and about the budget, but we like the Democrats on social issues. And that was what a lot of swing voters said to me. So they would prefer to sort of pick and choose. And a lot of, again, sort of academics and commentators, they sort of dismiss the swing voters, the independents, as the mushy middle. And they sort of say, oh, well, they don't care, they're not involved, they don't participate as much. But it's because, and this is also a charge leveled at young people, because they vote in lower percentages. But I would argue that the political system and the politicians haven't given them a reason to care. And so we'll see if the young people turn out in as high a percentage for Barack Obama this time around. I think that's a big question. I don't think a large number of them will be voting Republican, but will they turn out? I think is the question. Another group that I won't spend as much time on in this room, I think, are the Starbucks moms and dads. And these are, you've heard the term soccer moms. These are the suburban voters. These are your parents. And they are really swing voters. They care about the economy. They always care about the economy. They care about education. They care about national security. They care about issues that they think affect their lives and their kids. And they voted for Democrats in 2006, but not by a huge margin. They voted for Barack Obama in 2008, but again, not by a huge margin. In 2010, they swung really far over to the Republicans. So they have not made up their minds, and they are totally up for grabs. 50% of everybody in the country lives in suburbs and exurbs. So this is a huge bunch of voters, because cities tend to be very Democratic and rural areas tend to be very Republican. So these are the people that really matter. Then the last group, and the group that I focused on for Ohio, are what we used to call Reagan Democrats and what I call the America First Democrats. These would be police and firefighters. They would be people who work in factories. They would be lower and middle income, largely male. They tend to be a bit more socially conservative. And they liked, if they're old enough, they liked Ronald Reagan's message of optimism and national strength. And they had turned away from the Democratic Party in the 70s over issues of race and feminism, and they thought the Democratic Party had gone too far to the left. But they voted for Ronald Reagan, again, if they're old enough. Bill Clinton was a candidate that appealed to these voters. Bill and Hillary Clinton appealed to these voters. They did not go for Barack Obama, really a majority of them in 2008. And I personally think it wasn't so much about race. It was more about, Bill Clinton went to Georgetown and Yale Law School. I mean, he had Ivy League credentials. But he came across as just a guy that you would have a hamburger with. He doesn't eat hamburgers anymore since his heart problem. But he was just a regular guy, Bubba, Whereas Barack Obama comes off as very cool, very elite, the Harvard Law School credential. He just doesn't seem as approachable. He was very inspiring in 2008, I think, his campaign. But I don't think these America First Democrats really could get with him. Now, I don't know. I honestly have no idea where they are going to go in the 2012 election. I think, it will be very interesting. I interviewed a lot of people around the SB 5 fight that had told me to me, they were Reagan Democrats, but they were voting Republican, and they had been voting Republican for a long time. And they told me that was it. They weren't going to vote Republican anymore. They were so mad. Now, I don't know if that will stick, if that's just on the state level for state legislators and governor, or whether they will feel that way about the presidency. I think both parties know they need these voters. Barack Obama has been, he's in his State of the Union, and since he's been talking about industrial policy, he's been talking about tax breaks for manufacturing, he's been talking about penalizing companies that move jobs overseas, not allowing them to write off those expenses on their taxes, lowering tax rates for people, credits that create jobs here. So he's, I think, making an attempt to go after these voters. Santorum obviously made the argument that it was he and not Romney. I mean, Romney has done everything he can to sort of really kill it with these voters with all of his comments, you know, about $350,000 in speeches being chump change and, you know, all of his sort of very elite comments. And I think someone that is worth what, you know, it's not that people mind that he's rich, but, you know, he has money in the Cayman Islands, he has money in Switzerland, you know, so he doesn't pay taxes. And I just think these America First Democrats are going to have as much trouble identifying with Romney as they may have had with Obama. So, you know, we'll see. I think they are totally up for grabs as well. So, as I said, the number of these swing voters is growing. At the same time, the middle is being ignored. The centrist view is disappearing from politics. The two parties are further apart and more polarized than at any time in 100 years. And I talked about Olympia Snowe. Do you guys know who Olympia Snowe is, the senator from Maine who retired last week? I was very sad about that. I've known Olympia Snowe. I'm from New England. I've known her and covered her. I ran a journalism program in Washington. My students covered her for the Bangor Daily News. I've known her for many years, and I had enormous respect for her. But it was really tough for her within the Republican Party. She took a lot of grief for not voting with them all the time. And this is the way it is for centrist Republicans. It's tough. It's really tough. And we saw this a bit, I even think, with Senator Voinovich. I mean, he was older. Maybe he wanted to retire, but he took grief from his Republican colleagues. For daring to work with the Democrats, daring to try to work across the aisle and compromise. That's how you do legislation. That's how Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, who couldn't have been further apart on Tip O'Neill, Speaker of the House, obviously Ronald Reagan, President, they did Social Security reform, they did tax reform together. You can compromise and still hold to your principles, and you cannot govern otherwise. And I think that's a message that both parties really need to hear. So I think that the sort of bottom line message that I would leave you with is that the Americans and the swing voters and your generation want the politicians to focus on the real problems. They don't like this negative campaigning. They don't like this name calling. They think it's all a game. They want Congress and the politicians to address the real problems that are facing this nation. And they don't feel that's happening. And they want them to work together to solve these problems. And I think the rise of groups like the Coffee Party, No Labels, IndependentVoting.org, Americans Elect, that is a reflection of this frustration. And I think we are just on the cusp of this. I don't think we're going to see anything too significant in this election, but I think my opinion is that it's simmering and that these voters want change, they're angry. What I would say to you is make your voices heard. Get involved and make your voices heard. Not enough to vote. And I have in the book, I have my last chapter is called A Call to Arms. And I recommend, a few things like open primaries. If you have a ballot initiative process, obviously SB 5 was a ballot initiative process. Use it. Use it to sort of push for reform, whatever reform, you think. Election reform is the thing, of course, that I think we need the most. Make it easier for people rather than harder for students to register to vote. Some states, in Texas, they've passed a law, or they're working on a law. You can't use a student ID to vote, but you can use a gun permit. you know. So New Hampshire, trying to prevent students from voting. So push for more open elections, push for election reform. Legislative redistricting, I didn't mention, you know, that's a big reason why Congress is so polarized, because legislative districts are drawn to be safe for Republicans and Democrats. So they don't have to appeal to the independent voters. And we have about 50 truly competitive congressional districts in the country out of 435. So that's something that needs to be changed, is the way, in a lot of states, the public doesn't participate. They can't even comment or testify when congressional districts are drawn. So that's a big reform. Press for, you know, campaign finance reform, and show up at public meetings, testify, call, support candidates who offer solutions and want to work together and want to change the system. And so I hope that you all will, at some point, maybe in the library or whatever, read the book. I hope you will think about this and sort of carry it with you and think about staying involved and getting involved in politics. You know, I dedicated the book to the independent voters, and I really wanted to urge them to make their voices heard. And I close the book with a Thomas Paine quote. I open it and close it with Thomas Paine. And it's a quote that Barack Obama used in his inaugural address, which is not why I used it. But we have it in our power to begin the world over again. And I think we do. I think we do have it in our power to remake politics to something that we like a little better than what we've got now.